And because the addressing is so fine-grained now, people had privacy worries about this. That, okay, you can uniquely number every device, that means they can actually trace who you are. Most of devices and computers now will renumber themselves about every 10 minutes with a new random device number.
Is that on the software side?
That's on the software side. It's called IPv6 privacy extensions. All modern operating systems implement it. So you can use that. You can use DHCP, or you can still use a static address. Most servers will use a static address. And if you want to have fun, you can even play weird naming games with your server.
Dead beef.
Or Facebook used Facebook with a C on the end, and that's their IPv6 address. I don't know if Google played any games, but a few have.
One of the things with IPv6 was they're doing away with DHCP.
They wanted to,
Microsoft.
but people fought them on it.
Microsoft, like when you set this up in your house, in my experience, I had to set up DHCP 6 in order for the Windows computers to actually know that there was IPv6.
Yeah, but DHCP is much more useful than just assigning addresses.
But the things it provides are already provided by other parts of IPv6.
Well, for example, with the auto configuration, that also broadcasts your DNS servers too.
Yep, and or other things too, like Wins. I think there's support for that too.
And V6?
Will
I think
it
so.
support your like PXE boot and stuff like that?
I don't know.
I think you need some new cards.
Basically, when they came out and said DHCP was no longer needed, the reason why somebody came up with DHCP v6 is because of wanting to control the numbering of devices. So people doing asset management on their network wanted to say you will get a consistent IP address, matches to a database on our system so we can hit you for remote support. That was kind of the original motivating factor. And actually, one of the most hated things about IPv4 from a networking standpoint, NAT, is in IPv6 as well.
That was the whole point of to get around it, so you wouldn't have to NAT anymore.
Well, it's there, but it's not as evil as IPv4 NAT.
Okay.
So what?
Define evil.
Horrible to code a peer-to-peer application in.
Think SIP.
Fair enough.
No, SIP. I can't touch SIP.
Yeah, well, like SIP versus EEX, right? Like,
SIP. That's the best out there now too. But the way IPv6 NAT works is, if you have a set of hosts on IPv6 that you want to multi-home, so you have multiple ISPs. Let's say you're running a huge data center or something like that, but you aren't big enough to qualify for your own direct IPv6 assignment. You can put a NAT device on one of the sides that does a one-to-one mapping of addresses to your primary ISP's numbering. So all your devices only have one IPv6 address. It can go out either way, and they're fully addressable inside and outside the network. So it's network address translation, but it's not centralizing you to one IP address. That part, which everybody really hated with the port forwarding and all that crap, that is truly dead at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tried to put it back in, but there's your home router, when you go buy it, that supports IPv6 will not have it.
They have hardware on the market right now that has chips that will do this, or they're moving the software to do this specifically, or what's going on with market hardware?
So part of last year's IPv6 launch, all the major router and switch providers pledged to turn on IPv6 by default in all their products. So that's great, except now that there's at least 10 years worth of IPv4 only hardware on the market that now has to be replaced.
So will the
That's
network
great for
card?
them.
Oh yeah, of course, it's great for sales.
So will the network card or chipset in my, wait, is it 10 years old? Yeah, sure, 10-year-old server support IPv6?
What operating system are you running?
Linux?
Then you are supported as long as you're running on 2.6 kernel. And very late versions of 2.4.
What about Pixie Boot? We need Pixie Boot.
I have no idea
I'm
if
thinking
PXE
about
boot
like
works.
TFTPD, because you need that for Pixie Boot, don't you?
Yes,
Yeah,
that does work on
and
IPv6. I know TFTPD does work. I don't know if PXE boot was maintained into the IPv6 world. Because I know on a security aspect, the security people have
Yeah,
bit over.
Pixie Boot, but then again, TFTP is the same thing.
Oh yeah. No security whatsoever.
Yeah.
Whatchamacallit. Currently, the hardest part left with IPv6 is last mile. Most ISPs are, whatever. And it's really tied to the refresh cycle. As hardware gets refreshed, it will roll out. At this point in time, worldwide, we are at 2% of worldwide traffic is on IPv6. Which is a crap number, except that it was double last year's and it was double the year before's. So it's progress, but it needs to accelerate. And it's currently predicted that it will follow a exponential curve, because as more, well, it's tied to two things. It's tied to when the last of the IPv4 numbers get exhausted. That will help a lot. And also, as more clients come online, there's a better business case for IPv6. Because if you want to stay connected to the internet, upgrade your crap. And there's many ways to do that. Like, for example, the US government had a huge initiative the past few years to go to IPv6, unfunded, so of course they didn't make great progress. But they still managed to get 16% of their sites converted, which it is a lot of work to deploy out an IPv6 solution, especially for your networking people.
I believe I saw a Google talk where I think it was the IT for either the Navy or the Army has
Mhm.
gone to all IP or has a complete IPv6 network.
I guarantee you it's not the Navy.
Okay, then it was the I think it was the military intelligence branch or something. There was a Google tech talk about it.
Well, some departments made a lot more progress than others. Because for the US government, it was tied, IPv6 rollout was tied, that they pushed at the same time DNSSEC. Both of those were being tracked together. And admittedly, on the DNSSEC front, I haven't seen any other group other than the US government go further on it. Everybody else just saying, whatever, they'll give a crap.
Yeah, that also has like 2%.
Well, DNSSEC suffered from the problem that it took them so long to sign the root that now all the software install base is heavily fragmented on it. And the attacks aren't that easy to pull off, that there isn't the stronger motivation that IPv6 has to say, oh crap, everything's breaking. I guess from what I'm seeing, DNSSEC will get more traction the more the SSL CA certificate hierarchy breaks down. Because the more that breaks down, that's the only current, widely supported possible replacement for it.
Not really a replacement, it's that fixes the different problems.
Well, Google has an extension on Chrome that it's enabled on a beta basis that you can stick into your DNSSEC zone the fingerprint of your web server's SSL cert, and it will accept that without a CA certificate, certificate authority signature, because it's trusting it through the DNSSEC route instead. Now, that's what the guy said that put it in like 6 months ago. I don't know if he's ripped it back out. But SSL has its own fun security problems. Any questions on IPv6?
The IPv6 privacy extension,
Mhm.
what does that do to active connections? Like if I am on an IPv6 network and I'm
Mhm.
connecting to something in the cloud that's on an IPv6 network using SSH,
Mm-hmm.
and my local machine is changing its IP address every
10 minutes.
10 minutes, isn't that going to break my active SSH?
Well, if you run like an IF config or what's the new command? IPNet.
Just IPA.
IP address.
Okay. And you you have many IPv6 addresses set up. So the way privacy extensions will work is that it sets up another IP and it won't release the old one until your sessions are broken.
So then it won't, so if I have an active
But it will
S6
initiate
session
new
for-
ones on the new IP address.
Okay,
So a session continuing will use the old address until that ends.
Yes, until everything's been unestablished. And it'll just rotate. Most sessions don't last very long because most people are just doing like web browsing or something like that.
you
So it's
must
very
not use
transparent.
SSH.
Huh?
You must not use SSH.
Oh, I do, but the typical home user.
Yeah,
won't.
fine, you're typical home user.
What if you start targeting all those connections?
You can do all kinds of nasty things in a network layer. Some of the fun things that you do run in, the most common implementation is going to be this, what's called this dual stack implementation, IPv4 and IPv6 at the same time. It introduces its own nice little fun set of challenges. Because IPv6 has taken so long to roll out, and there's been various problems with it, if you are a client today with an IPv6 address and an IPv4, let's say you're a web browser, Safari still does this. Firefox used to. I don't know if they backed it out yet. They would do something called, they would basically dual connect to your server on both protocols. And whichever one was faster, all future connections would be done through for that session. Because at the time, so this is where it gets into that kind of how you do it on your home network with Verizon or Bright House today. A very common setup is to tunnel your IPv6 over IPv4 into an endpoint. Like for example, Hurricane Electric. So instead of having native dual stack connectivity, and this is how my house is set up actually, you tunnel through Hurricane Electric and then hit the web server. So what would happen is, originally when IPv6 was rolled out into all the operating systems, if you had a v6, it would prefer it. So when you go through Hurricane Electric or some network glitch happens because you're doing so many hops, you get a very poor experience going to the website. People complained and everything else. So this, it's almost like a drag race strip was put into the web browsers. And as a result, it'll pick based on what is fastest, not prefer one.
For any Bright House customers here, a side effect of setting up IPv6 at your house like Chachki is going to be describing is that your YouTube experience will improve. Because I am almost certain that Bright House is rate limiting traffic to YouTube, or their peering connections to YouTube's content network is horrible.
Bright House's connections to many things is crap.
So when I switched to IPv6, everyone in the house said, "Wow, all the YouTube videos are loading so much faster."
Could it be that you watch Netflix 24/7?
And connections to Netflix improved too, because Netflix is also on IPv6.
All right, now let's.
Oh, they finally enabled it.
Although, are you sure it's on the ISP, not from the YouTube side? Because I've had both.
If I
and I've seen it.
tunnel it through anything other than Bright House, I get a better connection to YouTube and Netflix. Because prior to this, I was using a SOX proxy to a Linode.
Mhm.
So basically, if the less Bright House has to do with my data, I'm glad this is being recorded on YouTube, is maybe at Bright House customer care will get back to me on Twitter again. The less I have to do with Bright House's actual network, the better off I am.
Or I used to run my own DNS server because they hijack your DNS failed.
Oh, I don't use their DNS
I
anymore.
hate that crap, yes.
Oh, yeah. I switched to Komodo.
I spent an hour trying to talk to him about it, and no one had a clue what I was talking about. And after that, I'm like, screw it. Because it was after I moved that I actually pushed on my notes.
Admittedly, if you're willing to pay for their business class, it's a whole world of difference of support and service.
I am business class. Or I'm a telecommuter class, which is part of the business account, which
But you get the business customer support people.
I have to talk to the business people, so I can't do any like support. A lot of my support I can't do on the weekend.
And they're not, because I remember when my previous jobs, we had business class, I'd pick up the phone and I'd say, I want to change my reverse DNS mapping. He'd be like, okay, I'll do that for you, it's not a big deal.
Maybe it's.
It might have just gone down the tubes.
It could be a separate type of class, because it is like a telecommuter package, but it is Verizon Business.
What was I? Okay, so that's the
Or-
dual stack
right.
that you typically end up at home.
Sorry.
Setting this up through Hurricane Electric is surprisingly easy, depending on how your ISP has played with your network connection at home.
Meaning what?
I'll go through all the deep, nice little variety of ways that your ISP can hate you. So, in order to go this route, if you want to set up IPv6 at home, the first and most important thing is, do you have a public IPv4 address? So at home, if you go to a site like What's My IP, doesn't match what you see on your router. Because your ISP may have a carrier grade net in front of you. So if you look at your IP for your on the public side of whatever network device you use, and you see a 10 dot, well, your carrier grade net right there, done. If it's not, well, so if it is carrier grade net, you won't be able to use any of these techniques. You will have to go to a different group called 6XXS, and they provide a client that you can install on your computer and do the tunnel a different way to get in to IPv6. It's kind of painful to set up, but it is possible. So assuming that you have a public IPv4 address, the next question is, do you want to do this to your whole network or not? If you do, the best approach that I've found is to take a look at your router at home. Many routers, I use a D-Link, to be specific, a DIR 815, but many other routers, when you go into their setup screen, if they have IPv6 support, they also have IPv6 tunnel support, which is required for Hurricane Electric. If you have that, great news. Go sign up for a Hurricane Electric account. I'll show it on the screen in a little bit. And go set up in your router, and you're done. You're on IPv6. If you don't, what you will end up having to do is one of two things. You'll either have to end up with a Linux box to proxy your traffic, like a NAT box would.
An actual decent firewall, basically.
Yes, you would need a decent firewall
Yes.
to do the same setup.
Yeah, it does.
Honestly, I went this route because I used to do this, and it was painful, unreliable, and slow. The deal like that, it just works. Not a big deal. The one downside I've noticed, though, is that with consumer-grade hardware, even though it has IPv6 support, it may not have IPv6 firewall support. So it may not be filtering any traffic coming into your network. That D-Link does not, for the record. So go trash my network if you want. That's fine. I don't keep anything on there. So, printer's IP? You can guess it, actually. And it is on IPv6.
Oh my gosh.
It is. Well, that's one of the nice upsides for IPv6. There's so many addresses that as long as you pick a random number, it's incredibly hard to scan just through sheer numbers alone. So,
1,000 devices, we know you'll block a 64, we'll get it working, so.
I have a 64 and I have a 43.
The block of 64 is 32 of the entire block of the current IPv4 internet. So
Yes.
that's
So it is scannable. It will just take you a very long
very,
time.
very long time.
There's that one report the guy released where he had a bunch of devices that scanned the entire IPv4 every 10 minutes.
It's very common to do nowadays.
So 20 minutes of yours, we're done. Or more, continuing to /43 also. So.
That will take significantly longer.
Yeah.
Honestly, you just cheat and go look at my what subnet I'm using on my website and then go from there.
Or we find out your purchase history and if you're using any assigned MAC address-based ones.
I have no idea. It's a brother printer, so I might just pick something horrible, unpredictable.
There you go.
Brother
The
printer.
first.
There you go. Come on, you security guys.
You said you got a /64 and a /43?
Yes, so what you end up getting from Hurricane Electric is Hurricane Electric will give you either or. So you can get a 64 or a 43. If you get a 43, you then have to subdivide that for your network. So with a 43, you could then subdivide that into a /64 yourself and just use it.
So a 64 is basically a network. Whenever
Yes.
you're talking about a 64, you should be thinking this is one network.
Yes, that's just the way to think about a /64 moving forward.
Small.
Yes. Technically, you can make smaller, but you're breaking the standard, things will randomly stop working.
All right, so I used to work for a company that had offices in Key West, Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
California, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
Colorado, Nevada, and 3 in Florida.
Okay, so it's
How-
like 15 locations.
Yes. How would you network that? Would each of those locations have a /64?
If they're running it.
Yeah,
PLS.
depending how big they are, yes, they would each get a /64 or larger. Because let's say you had, it all depends on how your switch and router configuration is.
I'm sorry, what is?
Your switch and router configuration, how you want to segment your network.
Okay.
So let's say you had a building and you had 3 floors in one of these satellite offices. You might want a /64 on each one. But you have so many freaking numbers. It's mind-blowing how many numbers you have. That's the biggest change from a networking standpoint, is to realize how much space there is.
I'll look for.
I was about to
the
say somebody
video
saying
from-
something similar 30 years ago about IPv4.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm gonna look for a video, 40-year-old video where they say the same thing.
Okay, so
Mhm.
to give an
Computers will
idea
never
of
need
how
more than 640
big
kilobytes of RAM.
we have an IPv6, this allocation policy of giving everybody monster amounts of space will continue until /8 of IPv4 or IPv6 address space is given out, which isn't predicted for something like 100 years. So once they've given out a 256th of the entire possible address space, they'll rethink at that point.
So could we buy a 256 networks and just sell them off in 200 years? Is this good speculation?
I don't know.
You just have to survive for 200 years.
Well, you reassign them to your heirs.
Actually, there you go.
Well, but that's a key thing with the
Technology's
numbering
lasted
authority.
for 100
You don't
years,
own
right?
addresses.
Hmm.
You're delegated them. So there is, which is interesting because in IPv4, because of the limited number of addresses, there's actually a gray market for addresses. If you're a big enough company and you want addresses, there are other big companies that have delegations of addresses. You work out a little deal, pay, I think the going rate right now is $80 an address. And you say, I want to